Today we are discussing federalism. Specifically, we are going to discuss American-style federalism, federalism and the Constitution, and the paths to nationalism. Please note that the book also covers modern federalism, which is not covered in this slideshow. Instead, be sure to read the section of the book and check out the posted crash course link to view a YouTube video on modern federalism. Federalism is a hybrid arrangement that mixes elements of a confederation, in which lower-level governments possess primary authority, and unitary government, in which the national government monopolizes constitutional authority. Under unitary systems, lower-level governmental entities are ultimately dependent on the national government of authority and resources. National governments raise money and distribute it to local units. In a federal system, government has constitutional relations across levels. The nation's constitution protects units at each level of government from encroachment by other units. Marijuana legalization in the states demonstrates the dynamics of American federalism. Some states have chosen to legalize marijuana, while other states have chosen to keep it illegal. Under federal law, it is still illegal, but the federal government has largely allowed states to decide how to handle marijuana. Ultimately, the Supreme Court has the power to decide what is left to the states and what power is left to the federal government. Federalism has evolved over time. Dual federalism is when the state and national government preside over mutually exclusive spheres of sovereignty. For example, the national government completely controls our national defense. Shared federalism is when national and state governments jointly supply services to the citizenry. They have some exclusive authorities and some shared authorities. Over time, the national government has taken a hand in almost all policies that concern the lives of the citizenry. The most important expansions of national power came in the form of the New Deal in the 1930s and the Great Society programs in the 1960s. These reforms expanded the role of national government. Some of the products of these programs were local pensions, welfare, and healthcare programs such as Medicare and Medicaid. Since the New Deal and Great Society, some presidents, including Nixon, Reagan, and Clinton, worked to give states more control over the implementation of federal programs and grants. When the Constitution was first adopted, the Senate had the motivation to protect the rights of the states because senators were selected by state legislatures. In 1913, the 17th Amendment was passed, establishing the direct election of senators. This came with the advantage that senators became directly accountable to the citizens, but the disadvantage that the senators no longer had a strong incentive to protect states' rights. Three sections of the Constitution specify the boundaries between the national and state government. First, Article 9, known as the Supremacy Clause, states, "This Constitution and the laws of the United States, which shall be made in pursuance thereof, shall be the supreme law of the land." The national government, through this clause, enjoys supremacy as far as its policies conform to the Constitution that prohibits certain kinds of federal activities. Article 1, Section 8 defines the powers of Congress. The framers agreed to a list of enumerated powers that should be in the domain of the national government. The national government was given special authority to address problems that were ineffectively dealt with under the Articles of Confederation. The Elastic Clause in Article 1 gave Congress the power to make laws which shall be necessary and proper for carrying into the execution of the foregoing powers. The 10th Amendment states the powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved for the states respectively or to the people. This amendment was meant to protect states' rights to govern. But the combination of the Supremacy Clause and the Elastic Clause have reduced the effect of the 10th Amendment and have allowed the power of the national government to expand. The Supreme Court settles disputes over the roles of the national and state governments. Some notable court cases include McCulloch v. Maryland and Roe v. Wade. In the former, Maryland levied a heavy tax on all non-state chartered banks, and an agent for the National Bank in Baltimore refused to pay the tax. The tax was created in retaliation for the creation of a national bank. The Supreme Court ruled that because the National Bank assisted Congress in performing several of its responsibilities, including borrowing money, levying taxes, and issuing national currency, the Elastic Clause gave the national government the implicit authority to create a national bank. In the latter, the Supreme Court ruled that states could not impose strict limitations on abortions. These are examples of cases where the Supreme Court decides the power of the national government and the state governments. Overall, the federal judiciary has aided in the expansion of the authority of the national government over the states. The nationalization of American politics became a necessity with the growth in population, industrialization, urbanization, and the development of national transportation and communication systems. The nation's appetite for public goods grew beyond the scope and resources of local communities and states. The nationalization of public policy is part of a response to a collective action problem. Americans collectively decided to adopt policies of national magnitude and scope that states did not have the resources to address. An example of nationalization includes business pushing for national regulations instead of state regulations. Companies operating in multiple states often want national regulation so they do not have to deal with different regulations in different states. As mentioned earlier, the two largest shifts in public policy were the New Deal and the Great Society. The New Deal involved a comprehensive set of economic regulations and relief programs that were intended to fight the Great Depression. Federal policy took two basic forms: regulating and financing state action. This major action by the national government was viewed as necessary because of 40% unemployment and states struggling to cover the cost of welfare. States signed up for programs created by FDR's New Deal, including the Works Progress Administration, old age assistance, and Social Security. President Johnson began his declared war on poverty as part of his Great Society agenda. Medicaid was created to provide health insurance to low-income families, senior citizens in nursing homes, and disabled Americans. In the 1960s, traditional state and local responsibilities became federal responsibilities, including school funding, teacher training, urban renewal, and public housing. Note that the state and local governments still do have some responsibilities in areas such as school funding. The programs of the Great Society were implemented by the states, but the states were required to follow strict guidelines to continue receiving funds from the federal government. Nationalization of public policy is part of a response to collective action problems. Nationalization helped solve coordination problems where states had different and often confusing regulations that hurt businesses that operated in several states. Nationalization cut down on reneging and shirking, where states would shirk their responsibilities. For example, policies reducing pollution make more sense at the national level because the effects of pollution can easily cross state borders. Nationalization also cuts down on cutthroat competition between states, which can have negative consequences for citizens. For example, the federal minimum wage keeps states from trying to undercut their competition by setting a minimum wage at an extremely low level. Today we covered federalism and the expanding role of national government. Be sure to read the section in the book on modern federalism. Next week, we will discuss Congress.